fiction. Writers like Elie Wiesel, Primo Levi, novelists like Imre Kertész, the historians, and there's nothing wrong with what they've done. In no way am I being critical of what they've done. But do we want to have an event that is so dominated by a representation that is felt to be as close to the actual event as possible? Do we gain by being obsessed with immediacy? Do we really want to banish all the tools of art, which have been applied, as I said, in war and other occurrences in human history? History is always being treated by historians, and we accept that. We accept that as a way of discussing a past reality. I'm not sure we gain anything as a society to so limit the way we talk and therefore think about the Holocaust.
The difficulty that Henry has, there's autobiographical details in this. I mean, there's rare in your books, but that's something, it's there. I mean, Henry is struggling with the idea that he wants to do a flip book style work that will have the Holocaust as a theme. You attempted the same thing. Can you talk about what you attempted to do at the beginning and perhaps why that didn't work?
Yeah, it's true. I did write a flip book. I did write the very first version of the novel was this play of which I read one extract, one fragment. I actually wrote the thing completely. And it simply didn't work. As a pure allegory, it didn't work. I'll maybe quickly explain why it didn't work. But anyway, then I added an extra layer. Then I thought I wrote this essay to try to fully explore the Holocaust and its representations. Then I thought we'd publish them together, and I thought that was really clever, a flip book. You know, the Canadian edition has a flip cover. The idea of having a book that never ends, in a sense. You've finished one thing, then you come to a page that is upside down. Therefore, you know, you haven't understood, you have to start over. The fact that there's no exit struck me as a wonderful metaphor for, in fact, that dark event called the Holocaust. But for reasons that were quite sound and that are not described in the book, my editor said, listen, an essay is a very specific product. A novel is not. A novel has broad appeal. An essay, a work of nonfiction, far more limited. So they thought the essay would drag down the novel. Anyway, I saw in these struggles I was having, in a sense, a metaphor for a struggle to deal with the Holocaust. So to have a writer who's struggling with expression, well, that's perfect. The very event I'm dealing with is one that makes people struggle with it. And the reason, by the way, that I didn't write a pure allegory, like, let's say, Orwell did with Animal Farm or Dante with his Divine Comedy, is the problem, it's inherent to the event. The problem with genocide, among the fact that it's humanely disastrous, the problem in artful terms with genocide is there is no story to it. In the sense, a story is, you know, A happened, then B, then C, then D, and there's sort of a causal link. You know, someone does something, he's driving, he doesn't pay attention, he hits a child. It's the beginning of a story. The problem with genocide is whatever the characters were doing before the genocide is completely irrelevant. Let's say we were in 1937, or let's say 39, and we were in this audience, and suddenly the police comes in, and some of you are Jewish and are taken away. That you were here, or having supper, or sleeping, or at work is irrelevant. Your life is interrupted because you are Jewish. And everything you're doing before is totally irrelevant. Who you are, what you are, your education, your socioeconomic status, irrelevant. So it's story defeating. Whatever I have you do is irrelevant. There's this meaningless interruption, you are killed. So that's very story killing. And also, one murder is a boon to storytelling. There's a whole genre, right? Murder mysteries. Who was killed? Why were they killed? Whether it's murder mysteries or great literature like Crime and Punishment, a single murder is a boon to storytelling. Once you have 50 victims, let's take the example of Robert Picton. Once you have 50 victims, the victims start to blur a bit. Now, some stand out. You know, they have children. Their humanity just shouts through those sad pictures we saw of the victims. Still, there's a blurring. Well, once you get 5,000, you know, once you get 1 million, 2 million, 3 million, it becomes totally depersonalized. Now, with Picton, the murders are a blur, but Picton comes into sharp focus. Who was this monster? Why did he do this? What can we understand of him? Well, once there's 50 Pictons, 100, 2,000, 5,000, 20,000, you get a case where both victims and victimizers blur. And so you have this incredibly violent event, but then on the other hand, is totally depersonalized. Completely depersonalized. So how do you tell a story about that? If you go back and give them personality, like you discover Anne Frank, and it's great, we have this wonderful writer, not only that, she's this young, beautiful girl. Well, in a sense, that's contra-historical. That Anne Frank was young and beautiful is totally irrelevant. That she was a good writer, totally irrelevant. So that makes very hard the telling of a story in which there's a mass murder, because it destroys the rules of art. So I say this in my essay at one point, it's a terrible thing. The Holocaust was not only humanely disastrous, it's also very bad art. It doesn't lend itself to a narrative story. So because of that, my allegory, my stand-alone allegory, did not work. It simply did not work, so I had to add an extra layer in which it would become the story of telling a story, of trying to tell a story, of struggling with a story. And so that's why Henry stops writing, and I thought what was happening with me, with my editors, for other reasons, lent itself to that purpose. And then you have this taxidermist who's also struggling with this play. He's been struggling for years. So I thought that was the right metaphor. In a sense, it's a story about trying to write a story. And then you have these fragments that are Holocaustal.
And then what happens, this extraordinary conversation that takes place between Henry and the taxidermist about the effort of creating this work. The taxidermist successfully creates a work of fiction about the Holocaust, which is not called the Holocaust. The word doesn't, the taxidermist never says that. The taxidermist is a man devoid of compassion. He's evil. What kind of an artist is the man who actually succeeds in creating a metaphor of the Holocaust?
Well, talent, artistic talent and morality don't have a direct link. You have great artists who are not necessarily nice people. We forget that, well, not we don't forget, but good people don't necessarily good art. And just as bad art doesn't come from bad people, you can have bad people who do great art, you can have good people who do bad art. So that he is evil doesn't mean he's devoid of artistic talent. And what he's up to, that I want to leave as an area of mystery. I mean, you're right, Henry himself, the writer, says, at one point obviously the taxidermist in school learned how to write. He knows how to write simple, good sentences. And why he's telling this story, why he puts on these, to tell people who haven't read it, Beatrice and Virgil are the two characters of this play that the taxidermist is working on, and they are animals. Beatrice is a donkey, Virgil is a monkey. And in this play, they're just waiting around in a state of latent terror, and they pass the time by just chatting. And they're obviously stand-ins for the Jews of Europe before their nightmare. Now, why the taxidermist, who is an unpleasant character? I wanted him to be ambiguous, and I wanted Henry's encounter with him to be ambiguous. Why this taxidermist's work on this play? He says it's about the environment. He's a taxidermist, he's concerned about the environment, the destruction of animals. He says 2/3 of animals in quantity and per species have been destroyed. He is trying to memorialize them. But is that really what he's up to? I mean, the motivations behind why we create things determines what they are really. But quickly, the intent of a creator can very quickly be overtaken by the intent of people who receive it. So even if the taxidermist is evil in intent, and I'm kind of ruining the story here by saying what we're... But even if he's evil in intent, his words can be recuperated and truly become a memorial. And if I'm being difficult to understand, let me give you an example. Of Auschwitz, there's very little photographic witness. Very, very, very few by survivors. There's a few very blurry photographs taken by survivors. Incredibly blurry. One in which you see some burning bodies. They're burning them outside one of the crematorium 3. You see what seems like bodies. It's very blurry, and there's a couple others. Most of the photographic record of Auschwitz as a functioning camp was taken by the Nazis themselves. Now, their intent was to memorialize the extermination of a pest. That was their intent. In a sense, it was celebrating their hygienic cleaning up of Germany. Well, we, of course, receive those images completely differently. We see them as soaked with sadness, and we see them with heaviness in our hearts. So there, the intent of the receivers is completely different from that of its creators. And the same thing with this play. The taxidermist has some kind of intent, but Henry the writer, and presumably the reader, receives them differently.